Zebra 3 report. The radio check goes unanswered. For 4 years, that red Gran Torino with the white vector stripe was the fastest thing on TV. But the men inside couldn't outrun fate. We face the fresh heartbreak of David Soul's recent passing, leaving the driver's seat empty. But darker still is the unspeakable tragedy of his partner who watched his wife and child die from a cruel epidemic in the 80s. Tonight, we park the car to honor a brotherhood that survived the fires of hell, both on and off the screen. Paul Michael Glaser as Detective Dave Starsky. Long before he slid across the hood of a red Gran Torino, Paul Michael Glaser was crafting his artistic voice. Born on March 25, 1943, he entered the world with a creative spirit that would eventually define a generation of cop dramas. By the time he landed the role that would change his life in 1975, he was a seasoned 32 years old, possessing a rugged charm that hinted at a deeper, more intellectual interior. He didn't just stumble onto the set. He arrived with a focused determination, ready to turn a standard police procedural into a character study of brotherhood and grit. As Dave Starsky Glaser brought a visceral energy to the screen that was impossible to ignore. He was the id to Hutch's ego, a man of action who wore his heart on his sleeve and his knitted cardigan with effortless cool. Audiences fell in love not just with his physical prowess or his driving skills, but with the fierce loyalty he displayed toward his partner. He took a two-dimensional script and injected it with genuine brotherhood, creating a chemistry that set the gold standard for every buddy cop dynamic that followed. However, the adrenaline of the screen could not protect him from a tragedy so profound it would shatter a lesser man. In the years following the show, Glaser faced a nightmare that played out in the public eye. His beloved wife Elizabeth contracted HIV through a blood transfusion in 1981 while giving birth to their daughter Ariel. The virus unknowingly spread to Ariel and their son Jake. The family watched helplessly as Ariel passed away from AIDS in 1988 at just 4 years old, followed by Elizabeth's death in 1994. It was a biblical sorrow, a hidden war fought in hospital rooms far from the glamour of Hollywood. Yet Glaser did not let grief destroy him. He used it to fuel a crusade for others. He channeled his pain into the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, saving countless lives in honor of the ones he lost. Today, he remains a symbol of resilience. He found love again marrying Tracy Barone in the late 90s, though they eventually parted ways. He returned to the screen sporadically, directing episodes of Miami Vice and appearing in shows like The Mentalist, always carrying the weight of his history with quiet dignity. Now Paul Michael Glaser is 83 years old. He stands as a survivor in the truest sense of the word, a man who conquered the heights of fame and navigated the deepest valleys of personal loss. His legacy is dual-fold: the iconic detective who owned the streets of the 70s and the tireless advocate who turned his family's tragedy into hope for the world. Jeff Goldblum as the Freak. Born in the autumn of 1952, Jeff Goldblum was a young eccentric, looking for a place to fit in. He was only 23 years old when he took the role of Harry the Freak Markham. He was raw, gangly, and possessed a unique rhythm of speech that hadn't yet become his trademark charm. He was an artist in the making, willing to dive into the darkest, weirdest corners of a script to find something memorable. Goldblum's performance was a masterclass in unease. He didn't play the villain with muscles or guns, he played him with psychosis. He twitched and stared, creating a character that was genuinely disturbing to watch. It was a bold choice for a young actor, proving that he wasn't interested in being a traditional leading man. He wanted to be interesting, and he succeeded, leaving an impression that lingered long after the credits rolled. His personal life was a journey of trial and error in the pursuit of love. He navigated a series of high-profile relationships and marriages, from Patricia Gall to Gina Davis and Laura Dern. For decades, he seemed to be the eternal bachelor, a man who couldn't quite make the traditional structures of family work for his unique spirit. There was a loneliness in his search, a quest to find someone who could match his specific frequency. Goldblum eventually found his rhythm both in life and art. He married Emily Livingston late in life, becoming a father in his 60s, a role he embraced with joyous surprise. He blossomed into a global icon of style and jazz, hosting shows and starring in blockbusters like Jurassic Park. He aged like fine wine, transforming from the creepy villain of the 70s into the beloved, quirky uncle of Hollywood, alive and thriving on January 2nd, 2026. Jeff Goldblum is 74 years old. He is busier than ever playing wizards and scientists, his curiosity about the world undimmed. He turned his early awkwardness into a superpower, proving that being the freak was actually the first step toward being a legend. David Soul as Detective Kenneth Hutch Hutchinson, born on August 28, 1943. David Soul was a man of melody, long before he was a man of the law. He walked into the mid-70s cultural zeitgeist as a 32-year-old artist who had already lived a full life. He wasn't just an actor looking for a break. He was a singer, a storyteller, and a wanderer seeking a place to land. His journey to the role of Hutch was paved with a desire to explore the human condition, a sensitivity that he would soon lend to one of the toughest cops on television. On-screen Soul provided the perfect counterweight to Glaser's intensity. As Hutch, he was the thinking man's detective, measured, often cynical, but deeply moral. He made us believe that a police officer could be vulnerable, that a tough guy could sing a ballad and still take down a criminal syndicate. It was this dichotomy that captured the hearts of millions. He was the soft voice of reason in a loud world, proving that strength didn't always have to shout to be heard. Off-screen, however, Soul's life was a tempestuous search for peace that often eluded him. He was a man who loved deeply but struggled to make it last, walking down the aisle 5 separate times in a quest for stability. He fathered 6 children, yet battled his own demons, including a highly publicized fight with alcoholism that led him to rehab in 1989. The sensitive Soul we saw on television was often bruised by the harsh realities of stardom and the internal pressure to maintain an image while his personal life fractured. In his later years, Soul found a second home across the ocean, becoming a British citizen and revitalizing his career on the stage and in music. He never stopped creating, never stopped singing, even as his health began to decline. He finally found a lasting partnership with Helen Snell, who stood by him until the very end. His life became a testament to reinvention, moving from the sunny streets of Bay City to the theaters of London, always chasing the next artistic high. David Soul passed away on January 4, 2024, at the age of 80. Now 2 years gone, the silence he left behind is still felt by fans around the world. He is remembered not just as the blonde half of a legendary duo, but as a complex artist who gave everything he had to his craft. His legacy is etched in the vinyl of his albums and the celluloid of his performances, a beautiful, imperfect soul who finally found his rest. Carl Weathers as Officer Dryden. Al Martin. Born in 1948, Carl Weathers was a sculpted athlete searching for a new arena. At just 27 years old, during his stint on the show, he was transitioning from the brutal gridiron of professional football to the sound stages of Los Angeles. He carried the discipline of an Oakland Raider and the hunger of a man who knew he was destined for bigger things. He wasn't just looking for a line in a script. He was looking for a way to channel his immense physical charisma. Though his time on Starsky and Hutch was limited to guest spots, Weathers was impossible to miss. He radiated a power that threatened to burst through the television set. Whether playing a loan shark or a police officer, he brought an intensity that demanded attention. It was a preview of the greatness to come, a magnetic presence that signaled he was too big, too charismatic, and too talented to remain in the background for long. But the climb to the top was steep and lonely. Weathers navigated the rocky terrain of personal relationships, marrying and divorcing 3 times as he built his empire. The transition from athlete to serious actor was fraught with skepticism, a battle he had to fight with every role. He carried the physical toll of his football years and the emotional toll of a life lived constantly in the public gaze, striving to be seen as more than just a body, but as a serious artist. Weathers achieved that dream, becoming a cinema legend through Rocky Predator and The Mandalorian. He worked tirelessly until the very end, reinventing himself for every generation. He found a late-career renaissance that earned him the respect of critics and fans alike, directing and acting with the wisdom of a man who had seen it all. He was a titan who refused to rest, always pushing for the next round. Carl Weathers left us on February 1st, 2024, at the age of 76. 2 years later, the void he left is still palpable. He died of cardiovascular disease, a heart that had given so much finally coming to a stop. He is remembered not just as an action star, but as a dramatic force who started on the streets of TV cop dramas and ended among the stars. Suzanne Summers as Lynda Emory, born on October 1946. Suzanne Summers was fighting battles long before she found fame. When she appeared on the show at 29 years old, she was a single mother who had escaped a tumultuous past. She was battling the scars of an alcoholic father and the learning struggles of dyslexia. She arrived in Hollywood not as a pampered starlet, but as a survivor scraping by, using her undeniable radiance to open doors that had been slammed in her face. In her guest appearance, Summers was more than just set dressing. She was a spark. She played the role of Lynda with a vulnerability that belied the dumb blonde stereotype she would later be famous for. Even in a small arc, she possessed a magnetic quality that drew the camera's eye. It was clear to anyone watching that this woman had a comedic timing and a screen presence that could not be contained in a dramatic guest spot for long. Her life behind the scenes was a war against her own body and public perception. She fought cancer not once but repeatedly, enduring hyperplasia in her 20s, skin cancer in her 30s, and a brutal breast cancer diagnosis later in life. She faced professional exile for demanding equal pay on Three's Company, a move that cost her a job but cemented her integrity. She was criticized, mocked, and dismissed, yet she rebuilt herself from the ashes every single time. Summers turned her rejection into an empire, becoming a best-selling author and a business mogul. She found a soulmate in Alan Hamill, a marriage that lasted decades in a town where love usually expires in months. Up until her final days, she was experimenting with treatments, writing books, and refusing to go quietly into the night. She lived her life out loud, controversial and brave, never apologizing for her will to survive. Suzanne Summers passed away on October 15, 2023, just one day before turning 77 years old. In 2026, we remember her not as the girl in the Thunderbird or the woman on the Thigh Master, but as a warrior. She fought for her health, her pay, and her place in the world, leaving behind a legacy of absolute fearlessness. Bernie Hamilton as Captain Harold Dobey. Bernie Hamilton was the veteran presence the show needed. Born in the summer of 1928, he was already 47 years old when he donned the badge of Captain Dobey. He came from a family of rhythm and art, the brother of jazz drummer Chico Hamilton, and brought a seasoned gravity to the role. He wasn't a fresh-faced hopeful. He was a man who had lived through the Korean War and the changing tides of Hollywood, ready to anchor the show with his imposing stature. Captain Dobey was the shout that started the engine. Hamilton played him with a glorious exasperation, constantly berating Starsky and Hutch for their destruction of city property, while simultaneously covering for them when the chips were down. He was the quintessential boss, loud, demanding, but fiercely protective. He gave the show its moral center, representing the establishment that the two cowboys were constantly bucking against, yet proving that the system still had a heart. When the cameras stopped rolling, Hamilton's life took a quieter, more introspective turn. He had weathered a divorce from Maxine King in the late 60s, a scar from before his fame peaked. After the show ended, he largely walked away from the acting world that had defined him. He retreated into the rhythms of music and the nightlife, running a nightclub called Citadel de Haiti. It was a shift from the public eye to the private soul, a transition that hinted at a man tired of the Hollywood grind and seeking something more authentic. Hamilton spent his post-TV years as an impresario of R&B and gospel, producing records on his own label. He found solace in the blues, releasing an album that winked at his famous character. He lived out his days away from the flashbulbs content in the world of music and art he had built for himself. His later years were quiet, a stark contrast to the yelling captain. he portrayed as he eventually succumbed to the frailty of the human heart. Bernie Hamilton passed away on December 30th, 2008 at the age of 80. Today, nearly 18 years after his death, he remains the unforgettable voice of authority in the landscape of classic TV. He rests at Riverside National Cemetery, a soldier and an artist who commanded the screen and then quietly exited the stage, leaving behind the echo of his command. Robert Loggia as Ben Forrest, Jack Parker. Born in January 1930, Robert Loggia was a man of the old school. By the time he was cast in the series at 45 years old, he was already a seasoned veteran of the stage and screen. He didn't have to try to be tough. It was etched into his features. He brought a maturity and a dangerous unpredictability to the set, arriving as an actor who knew exactly how to dismantle a scene and rebuild it around his presence. Loggia didn't just play bad guys, he played human obstacles. In his appearances, he provided a formidable challenge for the detectives, using his intense stare and explosive delivery to raise the stakes. He was the kind of actor who made the heroes look better simply by being a terrifying adversary. His performances were grounded and gritty, stripping away the campiness of the 70s and replacing it with genuine threat. However, the mind that could memorize complex soliloquies and terrify audiences was eventually betrayed by biology. After a lifetime of sharpness, Loggia faced the cruel decline of Alzheimer's disease. The man known for his wit and his powerful memory began to lose the pieces of his own life. It was a slow, heartbreaking erosion of a giant, a struggle shared by his devoted wife Audrey, who stood by him as the lights began to dim. Before the illness took him, Loggia enjoyed a magnificent career resurgence, becoming a favorite of directors who needed instant authority. He danced on a giant piano in Big and screamed at subordinates on Independence Day, cementing his place in pop culture. He worked for 60 years, a blue-collar actor with a white-collar resume, never losing his love for the craft until he could no longer perform. Robert Loggia died on December 4, 2015, at the age of 85. Over a decade later, his influence remains. He is the benchmark for the tough guy character actor, a man who could say more with a growl than most could with a monologue. He left the world having played every angle, a true heavyweight of American cinema. Peter MacLean as Officer Burke. Born in 1936, Peter MacLean was a man of discipline and craft. He was 39 years old when he took on the role of Officer Burke, bringing with him a resume built on the stage and in the classroom. A graduate of Emerson College, he wasn't chasing stardom as much as he was chasing the work. He was the quintessential character actor, the man who treated acting as a blue-collar profession, showing up to do the job right. Officer Burke was not the star, and that was the point. MacLean played him with a grounded reality that made the precinct feel alive. He was the background radiation of the police station, the guy doing the paperwork, the face that made the world believable. Without actors like MacLean, the stars have no one to shine against. He provided the stability and the realism that a show about two renegade cops desperately needed. MacLean's life was one of quiet achievement, but ended in a private battle. He was a man who had played Macbeth on stage and directed Wild West shows in Paris, a life full of color and drama. But in the end, he faced a silent killer. He developed lymphoma, a disease that slowly sapped the strength of the man who had been a pillar of strength on screen. It was a fight waged away from the tabloids, a dignified struggle against mortality. After his time on this beat, MacLean continued to work prolifically, appearing in dozens of shows throughout the 70s and 80s. He was the face you recognized, but maybe couldn't name the reliable talent that casting directors loved. He lived a life of artistic variety, moving from Shakespeare to sitcoms with effortless grace, respected by his peers for his versatility. Peter MacLean passed away on May 28, 2003, at the age of 67. Though he has been gone for over 2 decades, his contribution to the fabric of television remains. He represents the unsung heroes of Hollywood, the dependable talents who build the world so the heroes can save it. Danny DeVito as John the Apple DeAppoliso. Born in the late autumn of 1944, Danny DeVito was always the underdog who refused to stay down. At 31 years old, he was fighting against every physical convention of Hollywood casting. He wasn't tall, he wasn't traditionally handsome, but he had a fire in his belly that burned brighter than the leading men. He came from a background of hairdressing and hustle, ready to prove that talent comes in all shapes and sizes. In his guest role, DeVito was a dynamo. He played John with a frantic, nervous energy that was hilarious and compelling. He commanded the screen, not by dominating the space physically, but by filling it with personality. It was the embryonic stage of the persona he would perfect. In Taxi, the lovable scoundrel, the guy who was always working an angle, the character you couldn't help but watch. While his career soared, his personal life required a delicate balance. He built a legendary marriage with Rhea Perlman, a partnership that lasted decades and produced 3 children. Yet even the strongest bonds can fray. They separated in 2012. However, in a twist of grace, they never divorced, choosing instead to remain friends and family. It was a quiet heartache, the shifting of a romance into a friendship handled with a maturity rarely seen in Tinseltown. DeVito became a giant of the industry, directing cult classics like Matilda and starring in everything from Batman to It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He never stopped working, never lost his edge. He evolved from an actor into a mogul, co-founding Jersey Films and producing Oscar-winning cinema. He turned his distinct look into his greatest asset, laughing all the way to the bank. Danny DeVito is 82 years old now and shows no signs of slowing down. He is a national treasure, a man who proved that you don't need to be 6 feet tall to cast a long shadow. His legacy is one of joy, subversion, and the triumph of the little guy. Antonio Fargas as Huggy Bear. Emerging from a massive family of 11 children, Antonio Fargas was 19 August 1946. By the time he stepped onto the set of Starsky and Hutch, he was a 29-year-old talent who had already cut his teeth on the gritty streets of New York theater and film. With a Puerto Rican father and a Trinidadian mother, he carried a cultural richness and a street-smart vibrancy that could not be taught in acting school. He was ready to take a stereotype and turn it into an icon. As Huggy Bear Fargas did the impossible, he turned a snitch into a sovereign. He wasn't just a plot device used to solve a case. He was the heartbeat of the city, a man who ran his own world with style and wit. Audiences were mesmerized by his swagger, his leather trenches, and his ability to navigate the criminal underworld without ever losing his dignity. He became the definition of cool, a character so magnetic that he often overshadowed the detectives he was helping. But behind the flash and the catchphrases lay the struggle of a black actor trying to find depth in an industry that preferred caricatures. Fargas had to navigate the fine line of blaxploitation cinema, facing criticism for playing pimp-like figures while trying to imbue them with humanity. His personal life saw the dissolution of his first marriage to Taylor Hasty, a reminder that the stability he projected on screen was hard to maintain in reality. There were even rumors of early tension on the Starsky set, battles for respect that he had to fight with quiet professionalism. Life after the Red Grand Torino saw Fargas refuse to fade away. He embraced his status as a cult legend, marrying Sandra Reed in 1989 and raising a family that included a professional football player's son. He didn't run from his past. He celebrated it, becoming an ambassador for the nostalgic love of 70s television. He pivoted to independent projects, focusing on diverse storytelling and keeping the spirit of his era alive for new generations. Alive and well on January 2nd, 2026. Antonio Fargas is now 80 years old. He remains a beloved figure, a man who took a supporting role and built a kingdom out of it. His legacy is one of endurance and flair, proving that there are no small parts, only actors with big enough spirits to fill the room. Huggy Bear may have been a character, but Edward James Olmos as Julio Mendez. Born in the winter of 1947, Edward James Olmos was a man searching for a voice. At 28 years old, he was still carving his path, a young Latino actor in an industry that often didn't know what to do with him. He had a background in rock and roll and a face that looked like it had lived 1,000 lives. He brought a soulful weariness to the set, an intensity that suggested a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. As Julio Mendez Olmos was captivating. He didn't just deliver lines, he delivered emotion. Even in a guest capacity, he showed the depth that would later define his career. He played the character with a quiet dignity, refusing to be a stereotype. It was a performance that caught the eye, a signal that this actor possessed a gravitas that could anchor entire franchises. His journey was not without its scars. Olmos navigated a complex personal life involving 3 marriages and the challenge of raising a blended family of biological and adopted children. More recently, he faced his own mortality head-on, battling throat cancer in 2022. It was a terrifying ordeal for a man whose voice is his instrument, but he endured chemotherapy and fought his way into remission, a testament to his iron will. Almost transformed into a cultural icon, becoming the face of Miami Vice Stand and Deliver and Battlestar Galactica. He used his fame to become a fierce advocate for the Latino community, fighting for representation and justice. He became a Mexican national later in life, bridging borders and cultures. He never stopped working, never stopped fighting, and never stopped caring about the world around him. Today, on January 2nd, 2026, Edward James Olmos is 79 years old. He stands as a patriarch of cinema, a survivor of cancer, and a champion of his people. His legacy is one of profound seriousness and deep love. A man who took a small role in a cop show and built a lifetime of leadership upon it. Kristy McNichol as Molly Pete Edwards, born on September 11, 1962. Kristy McNichol was a prodigy. She was merely 13 years old when she appeared on Starsky and Hutch, a child navigating an adult world. With her brother Jimmy, she was thrust into the spotlight early, carrying the weight of family expectations and public adoration. She possessed a naturalism that was startling, an ability to cry on cue and make you feel it in your bones. In Little Girl Lost, McNichol broke hearts. She played the vulnerable yet tough kid to perfection, creating a dynamic with the detectives that showed their softer sides. She wasn't just a prop. She was a fully realized character, holding her own against seasoned actors. It was the performance that signaled her rise to stardom in Family, proving she was one of the most talented young actresses of her generation. But fame is a heavy coat for a child to wear. McNichol struggled privately while the world applauded. She battled bipolar disorder, a chemical imbalance that made the pressures of Hollywood unbearable. For decades, she also hid her true self, living in the closet to protect her career. The psychological toll of living 2 lives, the public sweetheart and the private struggler, eventually led her to make a drastic choice. She chose herself. McNichol retired from acting in 2001, walking away from the applause to find peace. She bravely came out in 2012, introducing the world to her partner Marty Allen, finally living her truth. She traded the sound stages for tennis courts and yoga mats, choosing mental health over movie credits. It was a quiet revolution, a reclaiming of a life that had been owned by the public for too long. Now 64 years old in 2026, Kristy McNichol remains retired and content. Her legacy is not just in the awards she won, but in the brave decision she made to leave it all behind. She is a symbol of self-preservation, a reminder that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is walk away and be happy. Lynda Carter as Vicki. Born in the summer of 1951, Lynda Carter was a beauty personified. At 24 years old, fresh off the pageant circuit as Miss World USA, she was looking to be taken seriously as an actress. She had the height, the eyes, and the presence of a goddess, but she had to fight to be seen as more than just a pretty face. She landed on Starsky and Hutch, right on the cusp of the role that would define her existence. As Vicki in The Las Vegas Strangler, Carter was radiant. She played the target of a killer, yet she imbued the role with a resilience that foreshadowed her future. Even in peril, she had a strength about her, a gaze that said she was not a victim. It was the perfect audition for the Amazonian princess she was about to become, showcasing the charisma that would soon captivate the entire world. Her life, however, was not a comic book fantasy. Carter faced the harsh realities of the legal system when her husband, Robert Altman, was dragged through a grueling bank fraud trial. Though he was exonerated, the stress was immense. Later, she faced the ultimate tragedy when Altman died of a rare leukemia in 2021, ending a decades-long love story. She also bore the trauma of finding a body in the Potomac River, a real-life horror far removed from television scripts. Through it all, Carter remained unbreakable. She became a jazz singer, a mother, and an icon, who embraced her Wonder Woman legacy with grace. She returned to the screen in the Wonder Woman films and Supergirl, passing the torch to a new generation while reminding everyone why she held it first. She grieved her husband publicly and poignantly, using her voice to speak on loss and resilience. On January 2, 2026, Lynda Carter was 75 years old. She is still a force of nature, active in music and advocacy. She proved that true power isn't in wristbands or tiaras, but in the ability to endure great loss and still stand tall. She remains forever and always a wonder. The tire smoke has cleared, and the streets of Bay City are quiet. Standing here in early 2026, the world feels colder without Hutch's golden voice. We honor the heroic resilience of Paul Michael Glaser, a man who walked through the valley of death and kept standing. They taught us that while badges tarnish and cars rust, the embrace of a true friend is the only thing that lasts forever. Zebra 3. You are clear to end watch. Rest easy, detectives.